So this is lesson 4. And what we're going to be learning about today and dealing with is the revolution of the Jews and the Maccabees. In the last lesson, we talked pretty extensively about Antiochus and all that he had done. So when you look at Daniel and his prophecy, remember I said before, ensure that you read Daniel 11 and Daniel 8. It says in Daniel's prophecy that the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. This was Daniel prophesying about the Maccabees in 1132. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be he corrupt by flatteries. But the people, come on now, hallelujah, the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So this first portion, 1136, is about Antiochus, the fourth Epiphanes, and then 1132 is about the Maccabees. So during this time, we're going to take a look at what was going on. The Jews were striving to be faithful to Jehovah when Antiochus would come to their town, Jerusalem. And we know in the last lesson we were talking about Antiochus had begun to enforce the practice of sacrificing pigs and just kind of recovering. These pigs were not being offered to Jehovah, but Zeus. And pigs were unclean animals to the Jews. So in First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 44 and then 47, the king began to send these letters out by the hand of messengers. We were talking about that, to the cities of Judah, to follow the laws of the strange land and to make these sacrifices. So we talked about this in the last lesson. They're supposed to build these altars and do all these things. So I wanted to give you guys a visual, right? So we have Jerusalem here in the city. And when you see the green here that I have, this whole vicinity are the cities of Judah, or now called Judea, that he was sending out these swines to these high priests, saying, you're going to build these altars, you're going to build these shrines, and you're going to sacrifice these pigs to Zeus. But lo and behold, in this little teeny town right here called Modin, things are about to turn around. When we look in First Maccabees, it tells us in those days rose up Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simon, a priest of the sons of Jehoram from Jerusalem, and he lived in Modin. So this is where we began to see the Jews are finally, after all of y'all read about, they went through and we talked about in the previous lesson, they have had enough of this madman. So here is the Maccabean dynasty, or the Maccabean families. And so we're going to learn about Mattathias, his son Judas, Simon, Eleazar, Jonathan, Judas, John Hyrcanus, and so on and so on. And like before, if you guys want this PowerPoint slide for reference, like we did with Israel, I could send it to you, because what I want you to look at, for those that know the New Testament, look down here. Herod the Great falls down through this lineage. Amazing, I thought. That's why I wanted to show you guys this entire picture. But we're going to deal a little bit with each one of these descendants of Mattathias. So Mattathias was kind of like Jeremiah against the Babylonians. We know Jeremiah was a weeping prophet, right? Because of all of the demise and the things that were happening with the Babylonians against the children of Israel. So Mattathias was likened unto that same type of prophet. As a priest, he was mourning and he was sorrowful because of what was happening to the people of Israel, or Judah, so to speak. Now, he had 5 sons. And his sons were right along with their dad. They were mourning and looking at the demise of their people being done under Antiochus. So the revolt began when Bacchides arrived in Modin with the enforcement from the king, commanding them to do these sacrifices to the pigs. And they would receive riches and gold if they performed these duties. Mattathias was like, you know what? Not today. So Mattathias told him, I refuse. I'm not going to do it. And when Mattathias refused, one of the priests that were there, lower level priests than Mattathias, I'll do it. I'm gonna walk on up here. I'll sacrifice the Jew. Well, Mattathias was enraged when it talks about that zeal that he had. That was anger. When it talks about in Maccabees, he had that anger, and he killed the guy. And in the midst of that rage, he went on to kill the king's commissioner, Apelles. So once he did that, he pulled down that pagan altar. He destroyed it. Now, after that is done, he knows the wrath of Antiochus is coming. The wrath of Antiochus is coming. So he flees and he rallies through the town, screaming all that, believe in God, Jehovah, you're tired of this, follow me. So he gathers up all these people and they leave with their cattle and their children and their women, and they all flee to what they call the wilderness. Okay, so they get out there and Antiochus finds out what happens. So now here comes Antiochus, the madman's wrath again. And it began on a Sabbath. When he arrives, I guess you guys probably read, when they get there, it's thousands of men and children. And it's on the Sabbath, so they say, well, we're not going to fight you. Well, daggone well, Antiochus and his folks don't care about that. So they killed thousands. They murdered them. They slaughtered them because they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath. And because of that slaughter, Mattathias decided, you know what? Next time they come at us on the Sabbath, we're going to fight. This will not happen to us again. So this is when you find Mattathias started going totally against everything Antiochus has been implementing throughout their nation. He begins to perform circumcisions. He starts pulling down the false altars, right? But when all of this took place, you have to understand that Mattathias was up in his age. He started this revolution or revolt, but he was an older man. But he passed away. And upon him dying, he appointed Simon, his son, as counselor, which is priest, and Judas as the military leader of the movement. Okay. And then the great Mattathias Maccabeus dies. So here we are moving forward with Judas Maccabeus, and Judas was called the Hammer. He was classified in history as the Hammer, and you'll see why. So Judas fought Syria and other nations. He just was a warrior. He started battling all of these Gentiles, paganistic folks, and he really went after Syria. And I thought it was interesting to just point out the fact that Apollonius, which was one of the Syrian commanders under Antiochus Epiphanes, Judas killed him, baby, and took his sword. And that was his sword he used in battle for the rest of his life against those very people. So he captured Jerusalem and, had to take it back from the Syrians. And he purified the temple, rededicated the temple. And this was 5 years after its defilement. Now, I want to pause here before I go forward. And I really need to break this down for you guys, because you see the significance of this in the New Testament, and we see it even today in history. There was a miracle that occurred right here. Okay. When he was in there rededicating, cleansing, and fixing up the temple, because of the destruction of the temple, they had this purified oil that they would use during their rituals, during their services or whatever. And so in him doing that, there was very little oil left that he found to light up the menorah. The menorah is that candle stand with, they have with all the lights and stuff on it, but they used oil back then. So when he went in there, he had what he thought was probably enough oil to burn for maybe an hour, you guys. But instead, what happened was the oil burnt and stayed lit for 8 days. And this is where we get the Feast of Dedication, which is modern day Hanukkah, from. This is where you'll find in the New Testament, Jesus Christ celebrated this. And that's why it's called the Festival of Lights, because it was a miracle that that oil burnt for 8 days. And this came about with Judas Maccabeus. So the next year, he began to fight against Egemiah. This is essential because you remember how Herod the Great treated the Jews. So Judas is the one that's going up Egemiah, and Herod is an Egemean. He's a descendant of the Egemean or the Edomites. All of that whole land comes together. So while Simon was marching northward, that's his brother, marching northward to bring back the Jews and the captives from Galilee and all the sources from Jordan, because, you know, they took all their artifacts, all of the stuff that they used in the temples. And remember, Simon is of the priesthood, so those kind of things are important to him. So during this time, finally, the madman dies. Antiochus the fourth, Epiphanes, madman, dies. And remember, back in the previous lesson, I showed you the hierarchy of the Seleucid leaders, or the Seleucid dynasty. Demetrius the first Soter, he becomes the new leader. Remember, I highlighted him, of Syria. But here we go. Syria besieged Jerusalem again. But look at these odds, you guys. It was like 120,000 Syrians against 8,000 Jews. And the battle ended in a treaty. You would have thought that those 120,000 Syrians would have slaughtered those 8,000 Jews, but that battle ended in a treaty. Now, we're starting to see the death of Mattathias, Maccabee's seed. During this battle, Eleazar died, and it's historical because they called him the beast killer, which ended up killing him. He went to spear an elephant, and when he speared the elephant fell on him and killed him. So quite naturally, we see how these Syrians are. The Syrians broke their treaty, and this went back and forth, back and forth. Now we begin to see Rome stepping up on the scene. We already saw Rome in Egypt, and here we see Rome again. So Rome is paying attention to this warfare going back and forth with the Jews and the Syrians. And so Rome allies with the Jews. That's significant. They ally with the Jews. So let's keep going. So during one of the wars, because like I said, it's going back and forth with Syria and Jerusalem, or Judea. Finally, Judas Maccabeus dies in war. And Jonathan is then named as Judas's successor. That's his brother. Now, this is where we began to see what we talked about last week about Israel, the reflection of how this Jewish government starts to set up in Jerusalem. So Jonathan is the person that sets up the Jewish government that we see reflected in the New Testament. And by now, Demetrius the second Nicator is the leader of Syria. Jonathan is taken hostage, and Judas Maccabeus, who is Simon's son, remember Simon the high priest, this is how he ends up dying, took Jonathan hostage, and so they think that Jonathan is dead. They pay this ransom, and quite naturally, as the Syrians perform and do the thing that they do, they betrayed him, got the money, and killed Jonathan. So let's continue. Simon ends up building a great monument in Modin. Remember, that's where they all come from, to honor his father and his brother, because they have fallen. And he takes on the role as high priest. And this is where we see the political and the religious coming in. So I know y'all know where y'all got to know where this is heading. So we see in the New Testament this being manifested when Christ comes on the scene. So other things Simon did was he fortified Judea, elevated his sons to military positions. He ensured protection of Rome against Syria, made sure we had a good relationship with Rome. We good. Y'all have our back. Battle Syria with us. And he ended up being last of the Maccabees. Okay. And he was classified as high priest, captain, and governor. This is important. So we see that in who, guys? Pharisees and Sadducees. So 8 years after building the monument, Simon's son, Judas and John Hyrcanus, he put them in position and elevated them. All right. And Ptolemy, and this is not the